We have a great lineup of speakers for you, and so I'm very excited to have them all on. We have several topics to talk about, from bees to butterflies and hummingbirds, and we look forward to following up this presentation with others as well. Just to give you a little bit of information about some resources, you can go to our website at westernhummingbird.org. And you can find this session is going to focus on California. And you can find our California handbook on that website, where you'll see information about hummingbirds in California, as well as some of the plants that they use. Just to share a little bit about, can anybody see the poll results? Has everybody
Yes,
seen?
we can. Yes, we can see them.
Thanks, Greg. So just to know who's online here, federal employees working to restore habitat is 33%, non-federal 31%, generally interested in pollinators 50%, specific interest in bees 23%, specific interest in hummingbirds 20%, and specific interest in monarch conservation 25%. So thank you very much. That's exactly what we're going to do for you today. One more thing that I wanted to share is that the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation has a pre-proposal due date for funding for habitat restoration for pollinators. And this is a national program with $1.8 million available. I recommend that you go to the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation webpage and look for the information there. You can find the description and the RFP for the program on their website. So please make sure that you check that out. And at the end of the program, if Jim Bond or somebody else from National Fish and Wildlife Foundation is still online, then you can definitely ask them further questions about this at the end of the program. All right, I'm going to stop the share right now. And again, welcome everybody on to the program. And I'm going to introduce our first speaker, who is Dr. Greg Butcher with the U.S. Forest Service International Programs. He is the migratory species coordinator, and these workshops are his brainstorms. So thanks very much, Greg, for coming up with this idea. It's obviously a great idea from what we can see from the large number of participants who are coming on today. We'll be looking forward to working with Greg to come up with our next sessions. I'm Susan Bonfield. I'm the Director of Environment for the Americas, and we facilitate what's called the Western Hummingbird Partnership. The Western Hummingbird Partnership is the program that is working to protect Western migratory hummingbirds in Canada, the US, and Mexico. And with that, Greg, I'm going to let you take over.
Oh, here I need to.
If you have any questions, please put them in the chat box. I'll take them as I can, but we'll take questions at the end of each presentation. And Greg, if you have a presentation, you should be able to get that up now.
I don't see my presentation, so let me try this again. Oh, that's because I closed that by mistake. Give me a second here.
Oh, and I'm going to give credit to two other people for these workshops, I guess because I've been working with Greg for so long on these. I want to thank Cheryl Carruthers and Deanna Williams. They were working on these workshops for a couple of years, and they were supposed to be live. So maybe I'll switch it that Greg was in charge of the virtual component. How's that sound? And Deanna and Cheryl were the brainstorm behind what we were hoping would be live events. All right, Greg,
Okay,
how are you doing there?
Let me try one more time here.
So I'll just give a little bit of information about who's online while we're waiting for Greg. We've got Pamela Zevitt, Biodiversity Conservation Planner for the City of Surrey in British Columbia, Canada. Some people are on an iPad. I don't know if that has to do with why you can't see anything, Denise. Live transcription for the hearing impaired. If anyone can tell me how to do that, I'm happy to turn that on. Some people went into the chat and still did not see the poll. I'm wondering if it has a limit. And again, someone asked for the live transcription. John, if you can give me some information about where that is, I'm happy to turn that on. All right, Greg, you're coming on with your presentation.
It was hiding for some reason,
Yes.
just to make life interesting. Okay, welcome everyone. Really glad to have you here. We plan a whole series of webinars, so this is just kind of the beginning of our commitment to creating more habitat for pollinators, especially throughout the Western United States. Our real goal here is to create a toolkit, and so we just see this webinar as one step in creating a toolkit. And we're committed to doing this for California, and so a lot of what we're doing today is going to be focused on California. But if California isn't your interest, I think there'll be plenty for you to learn. I'm certainly hoping to learn a ton today.
We can't seem to get the volume increased.
So someone has a
Maybe it's audio settings.
Someone's not muted, so if someone could mute, that would help a lot. Sue's already introduced us to the Western Hummingbird Partnership. Please mute someone.
I'm going to go through and mute everybody here.
Okay, great. So as Sue said, we're a tri-national network of partners. We have some great partners in Canada and Mexico, even though we're focused on California today. And as Sue said, we have this habitat guide for California. We also have habitat guides for other regions in the Western United States. So go on the Western Hummingbird website. You can find habitat guides for hummingbirds throughout the Western United States. Okay, let's see. I can't read my slides. That's interesting.
You have pollinators are a priority.
Yeah, so we're in a really good spot in terms of conservation because more and more people are focused on pollinators, very concerned about pollinators, but there are lots of other priorities out there as well. And those of us who work in the Forest Service, the huge priority is planting trees. And so we need to compete in terms of, we need nursery access in order to grow plants for pollinators, but a lot of those nurseries are really focused on growing trees. And so it's going to sort of be finding all nurseries at hand who can help us provide plants for pollinators. Yeah, I have lost the top of my slides. I'm going to back off a little bit so I can read them. So as I say, our goal is to create a pollinator habitat project toolkit. Our first goal will be to do one for California. Our second goal will be to do one for the Pacific Northwest. And I hope others who are on this call will do them for other regions before we have a chance to do that. We want these toolkits to be one-stop shopping for land managers. So we're imagining someone out there who has a chance to work on a piece of property, but they are looking for a very technical to-do guide, and we're hoping to provide that online for places for ecoregions within the state of California, ecoregions within the Pacific Northwest, and hoping you can do that for other areas that you're interested in. So there's a lot on this slide, probably more than there should be, so I'll spend a little bit of time on it. But we want to provide practical guides for each of these steps. We want to help people identify what the target pollinators are for their region, and that's really what a lot of today's workshop is about. We want to talk about bees and monarchs and hummingbirds and help you understand why these are important targets for conservation. And we want to talk about what plants those species need, not just any time of the year, but throughout the growing season. So we want early plants, mid-season plants, late plants. We want to make sure the plants are native because pollinators are adaptive to native plants, and they're adapted to plants that are appropriate for their region and for their local soil conditions. If they're not appropriate for local soil conditions, we're going to have trouble raising those plants. To be successful, we're going to have to organize seed collection, seed storage, and seed propagation, which is why we're going to need the nurseries to help us out and to give us expert advice on how to do that seed collection. We need those nurseries to have seed mixes available whenever planting opportunities arise. And so part of what we're doing as our project is thinking about all the different opportunities that can arise for pollinator planting. We need to know when soil enhancement is necessary or other efforts are needed to improve germination probabilities. We need to think about whether we have staffers that can do the work, whether we can hire contractors, or whether there are volunteer organizations that work on our lands that can distribute seed at scale. So how can we combine what we're doing with other priorities that are happening on a land that enables increased diversity and quantity of plants for pollinators? And what's the best timing? So for different kinds of plants, seed distribution might happen at different times of the year. So we want to optimize those opportunities as well. And we know lots of projects that have been successful initially, but don't last over the years. So we want to revisit projects year after year to evaluate success. And we know we have huge issues in many lands with invasive species. So how do we promote appropriate pollinator plants while we're fighting off invasive species? So we've taken on a big task, but we're all dedicated to pollinators. And so we needed to commit ourselves to do what we need to do to make these things happen. We're hoping that you will be part of our community of practice for saving pollinators, for planting habitat for pollinators. So as part of our community of practice, can you please let us know what you need to be successful? If you're doing a project, please share your successes, and heaven forfend, share us your failures as well so we can learn from those. Let us know what resources you have available, what that can help us do our projects, and what resources you need so that we can help you do your projects. Let us know what opportunities you see that we might also have that we can take advantage of. Let us know your challenges, and let's work together as a community of practice for pollinator habitat. Now, I probably know the least about all this of anyone on this call, and so I'm going to pass this on to the experts. But just to let you know, I am committed to doing this over the next several years, and hoping that you'll get in touch with me to share your path as we try to do pollinator conservation. So thanks very much, Sue, and
Yep.
I will stop sharing so that others can share.
Okay, thank you so much, Greg. If you have one question for Greg, we have about enough time for one question. You can put it in the chat box. If you have any general questions for the work that we're doing through the Western Hummingbird Partnership or through these pollinator sessions. I don't see any specific questions, and I know you might need to wait until you have some more detailed information. So what I'd like to, yes.
I'll be on the whole time, so happy to talk whenever
Okay,
the time comes.
great. So I am going to pull up our next speaker, who is Lauren Panicio. Lauren is a professor of entomology at the University of Oregon. She has been motivated to study how to design agricultural systems to better support humans and wildlife. She's been investigating strategies for designing agricultural systems to promote biodiversity conservation and the links between conservation strategies and improving livelihoods. So thank you, Lauren, for joining us.
Thanks, everyone. It's so nice to see everyone. And so today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about conserving California's pollinators. And yes, I've moved to Oregon, but I'm pretty sure Oregon is basically part of California. I think it doesn't really end. And so some of you may be aware that California has an incredible diversity of native bees. They come in all sorts of sizes, shapes, and colors. I'm a particular fan of the ones on the green one on the left, which is a beautiful little osmia bee. We also have bumblebees up on the right corner. And there actually ends up being about 1,500 to 1,700 species of wild bees in California that we either have named or we've estimated. There are also all of these non-bees, which we call them in our lab, that we'll hear a little bit about. But what I think is so special about California when it comes to bees is that California really is like the Amazon for bees. So bees peak in diversity in Mediterranean and desert environments. And I did not make this figure. I would not have chosen this color palette, but you can see the dark red areas are where we have the highest diversity of bees. This is actually from a recent publication, just came out about a month ago. So you can see that, California, as well as like the desert Southwest, the actual Mediterranean, South Africa, Chile. So those are the places where we have all the incredible bees. And as you can see from like the red concentration, because we're an area where there is the most, like a lot of continuous land, it really is California and places around us where we have that global hotspot of bee diversity. That's often not the case with something like butterflies or flies. Those tend to concentrate their diversity in the tropics. So when we're thinking about conservation in these areas, it can do, in terms of like on the global scale, it can be really important. Also, just to make sure we're all on the same page on what are bees, bees are vegan wasps. So they are part of the order Hymenoptera. And this is actually the little family tree of all the different groups of wasps, of which there are many. And way down at the bottom, we have Apoidea, which are the speciform wasps and bees. And so this includes other solitary wasps that mostly eat like lep larvae and things like that. But really bees are just like they're wasps, but that have given up, the meat eating, and they're 100% vegan, 100% pollen and nectar. A lot of times the wasp is not a very useful common word because it just means so many things, but that is where bees fall. When we think about the solitary bee life history, we start with the female adult, and these females go and forage for nectar and pollen. They usually make a nest in the soil, and they like collect the pollen on multiple foraging trips into these little balls. They lay a single egg on that little pollen ball. The egg develops into a larva, into a pupa, and then an adult bee. Bees usually overwinter in the pupa or larval stage. So underground throughout the winter right now, there are little pupating bees everywhere waiting to come out when the time is right in terms of temperature. This is a little different from something like a bumblebee's life history. So bumblebees are eusocial, so they have a queen. And starting kind of over in the left, you have this queen actually is the one who overwinters. Then she goes out and forages. I've actually been noticing a lot of queen bumblebees on my manzanita right now. So she's going out and foraging originally, collecting a bit of resources, enough to be able to create some workers. Those workers develop, via larva and pupa, and then the workers start doing the job of the queen. The queen mostly stays in the colony. But then they send out some males as well as new queens sometime in the end of the year. These do a bit of foraging, but are mostly there to mate and then go, find a place underground to overwinter. This is really different from the honeybee life cycle, which many people are pretty familiar with, particularly because honeybees can survive the winter. So the colony itself will survive the winter. In terms of bumblebees, it's just the queens that are overwintering. Bees have just the most amazing diversity of places they nest. This is a bunch of ground nesting bees. I mentioned that most bees are ground nesting. So some of them will like sit their little nest entrances like up in the top corner. You'll often see these fields of these tiny, tiny little holes. Sometimes you'll see pollen around them. And those are bee nests. I particularly like the one in the right top corner. Those are called turrets, like little castle turrets. Not really sure why they make those, except for that they're super adorable. Those are from bees called Diadasia, which we often see in the desert. And these aggregations can get really large. So in the bottom corner, we have an aggregation of nomia bees or alkali bees. These are actually really fantastic pollinators for, what is it? Something that's grown kind of in alfalfa. That's it, alfalfa. And so they actually, growers have actually cleared spaces of land next to their fields. So these alkali bees will nest there, and then they provide incredible pollination to those fields. And then in the corner, the left corner, we actually have a bumblebee nest. So bumblebees will often nest in really shallow holes in the ground, also cavities in trees. But you can see they kind of look like these weird alien space colonies. They actually ferment the pollen and make these like little globs. So people will sometimes get them in their houses as well, but incredible diversity of the way bees nest. On the other side of the spectrum, we have the above ground nesters. And this again is just, everything under the sun is what they do. In the top corner, the top left corner, we have a bee, actually a wool carder bee. She's collecting the fuzz from leaves to line her nest. So that's why they were called wool carder bees. They used to always show up, trying to steal wool from people's wool carts. You also see bees collecting leaves. I know that when I had roses in Riverside, I'd always get these little like circular notches taken out of my rose leaves. And it was little leaf cutter bees collecting bees to line their nests, which they put in existing holes within wood. So you see the middle picture, there's kind of these small little holes in that tree trunk that are stopped up with mud. Those are the nests of leaf cutter bees. And some leaf cutter bees actually line their nests in beautiful petals because it's lovely and beautiful. In Northern California in the forest and also up to Oregon, we do get a lot of bees that'll nest in blackberry canes or native, either native or non-native. And so they sort of hollow out those pithy stems and make nests in there. You also get bees that make these like tiny little rock nests and like the corners of branches that's up in the corner, as well as in snail shells. It's all over the place. But these types of resources are necessary for them to be able to fulfill their life cycle. Here's another nice diagram where you can see kind of like what the nests look like inside. So the top is that leaf cutter bee. So we have some kind of existing reed or hole within wood. They make these different partitions, make their little pollen balls, and then seal it off with leaves. A lot of this like really complex sealing and stopping off are to prevent parasitism and also to keep the nest itself dry and mold free. So the bees seem to do a lot to try to keep mold from happening in terms of both the secretions they produce and as well as like all of this very careful partitioning. The alkali bee, you can see that really deep nest that goes underground. They make these specific little cells. They lay their egg, they close off that cell. Love the mason bees and those tiny little huts they make. And some bees actually do excavate wood, like the carpenter bee. Maybe you guys have encountered those on the sides of your houses. So they will actually make holes in wood and won't use existing cavities. All of this is really different from what we usually think of when we think of the life history of bee, because we've mostly been told about Apis mellifera. This is the European honeybee. It was introduced to the Americas actually originally by the Pilgrims, but we have since brought over many colonies. It is a very important bee for agriculture. It does a lot of our pollination, but in terms of a lot of people in this group, it is non-native and it is 100% invasive and destructive in the Americas. There's actually no bee really like it. The closest relatives are the bumblebees, but we don't have any native honey producing bees in North America, north of Mexico. There are some social honey producing bees that were, for example, managed by the Incans in the neotropics, but we don't have anyone in the US or Canada. These are the guys, when you see these feral colonies, these, you guys have probably heard, honeybee hives and wax and all those things. You'll often see these like complex, waxy comb structures in trees and cavities. And this is what a feral colony looks like. So it may not be really news to you, but bees are in decline globally. Not the European honeybee. It is sick, but there are probably more honeybees today than there ever have been in the history of our Earth. We've actually moved them to every continent beside Antarctica, but native bees are in decline. And this is primarily due to inadequate nutrition, infectious disease, and pesticides and other chemicals. This is a really interesting graphic where you can see that across the US, the places where we are red is where there are both very few bees and extremely high pollination needs. So the Central Valley of California has very few bees and we grow the world's basically almonds and a lot of animal pollinated crops. So addressing this bee decline problem is important not only for conservation, but to make sure we have stable yields and good food security. So I'm going to go through each of those kind of key problem bees are facing and what we know about it, what we definitely know. And to start with is inadequate nutrition. And so to understand what that means, it's really just, there just aren't enough flowers out there. Bee abundance and richness tends to track flower richness and abundance. So where you find really great places for flowers, you tend to find really great places for bees. Most adult bees eat some pollen, mostly nectar. So they're kind of using nectar as cheap calories to power their flight, but they definitely ingest pollen as well. But females provision their nest with pollen, mostly pollen, because it's so full of proteins and lipids and all those good things. And they process the nectar and often do lots of crazy things with it as well. In the desert, there are these amazing oil collecting bees. It's a picture at the very bottom. A group called Centris is particularly one of them. And they have these like really hairy legs that they dip into the pollen, into the oil to collect it. And you can see that bees actually from these pictures collect pollen in a variety of different places in their body, either on their legs, which is something we're maybe more familiar with, but also on their bellies. That's the center picture. And then there are some bees that don't collect pollen, but collect things like oil. But all of these things are both important for them to be able to forage, the adults, as well as to provide food for the next generation. And what's great about bees is there's this idea, this kind of idea of like, if you build it, they will come. And often when we think about how do we restore things for bees, we can just think of how do we support healthy, thriving plant communities with lots of diversity. And so if we kind of have that plant community there, the bees seem to show up. So it's a great thing about working on bees instead of mammals or things like that that have more complicated things going on. And so for each of these, I'm going to go through the types of activities we know hurt them in the red, are harmful, and those that we know promote bees in the green. So we know that grazing managed bees in natural areas is a way, if resources are limiting, like pollen and nectar. So when we graze managed bees, that's like bringing honeybee colonies to natural areas or other managed bee species. They're in such high abundance, they strip all the nectar and pollen, and then there's nothing left for the native bees. Drought, increasingly we know that drought both impacts how many flowers are blooming, but also the protein and lipid content of the pollens that plants produce. Land use change in general, right? Like when we convert things to cities and agriculture, we often don't put a lot of flowers back in there. Overgrazing can be problematic and lead to lower flowers and therefore lower bees. Invasive and non-native flowering plant species, non-flowering plant species, particularly Eurasian grasses. So Eurasian grasses often outcompete all the flowers that produce nectar and pollen, and they also limit nesting sites. In terms of good things, we know that an appropriate amount of grazing promotes healthy plant communities, which also promotes healthy bee communities. Habitat restoration, such as wildflower seed mixes or anything to get flowers blooming again in different areas, is helpful. And we know that fire and other natural disturbances in forests and grasslands and chaparral can be helpful for bees if they're also promoting that flowering plant community. Next, we have infectious disease, which you've heard a lot about maybe in this whole pandemic thing we've been going through, but maybe not so much from the bees' perspective. When we're thinking about bees, bees actually pick up most of their viruses and parasites from flowers. So a sick bee will defecate or come into contact with, or like cleanse themselves on a flower that'll deposit the spores or viral cells on that flower. The next bee to come will then pick up those viruses. So flowers are basically bee doorknobs. You'll never look at flowers the same way again, but so that is how they transmit viruses. They can also get them from other bees. So social bees often have a lot of different infectious diseases they're dealing with. There's a whole variety of viruses, funguses, and protists that all can be transmitted via flowers. And they are, really importantly, they are shared between many species of bees, including the European honeybee. And so many of you heard the European honeybee is experiencing a variety of problems in managed agriculture. And when we have wild bees in that system as well, many studies have found that wild bees will pick up the diseases that the managed bees are carrying. So bad things, moving it around and introducing new bees to new areas. So this is a way we can move diseases around, as well as having limited resources with high aggregation of individuals on those resources. This is the amplification effect. On the other side, things that improve infectious disease or lower the amount of infectious disease in populations, bee and flower diversity. This is often called the dilution effect, which is known in many different groups of wildlife, as well as having abundant resources. So individuals aren't aggregating on certain flowers and therefore lowering their chance of picking up viruses on that flower or parasites. Great. Next, in terms of threats, we have pesticides, herbicides, and fungicides. We know that both low toxicity, long-lived pesticides like neonicotinoids, as well as high toxicity, short-lived pesticides like pyrethroids have lethal and sublethal effects on bees. They're often tested on honeybees, which can, honeybees are social and have very different life cycles. So we don't know a lot about the specifics or which are worst of them, but we know that they definitely have negative effects, either through being directly sprayed, this will often kill bees, but also through picking up, for example, neonicotinoids in the pollen and nectar they eat, as well as, a lot of those ground nesting bees, if we end up with neonicotinoids or other pesticides in the soil, they'll pick that up when they're putting soil in their mouths to make their nests or excavating. Non-pesticides like fungicides and herbicides can also have lethal and sublethal effects. The almond industry has learned this the hard way. They tend to spray a lot of fungicides because almond blooms in February in California, and they've learned that this has a pretty detrimental effect on both honeybee populations as well as wild bees. There's only bad things with pesticides and herbicides. Basically, any type of aerial or ground spraying is not great. And there's more and more evidence that mosquito abatement is probably having negative effects as well, though this is incredibly hard to study because, as you guys can imagine, it's difficult to find a control, like where all those pesticides are not being sprayed. Okay, so what do we know about the status of bees in California habitats? I want to go through a few of the main habitats and the evidence of what's going on in them. And I wanted to start with the Sierra Nevadas and forests. And so many of you might look at this picture and be like, that doesn't really look like the Sierra Nevadas. We're used to more of these, closed canopy, really densely packed trees. But of course, this is in Yosemite National Park in the Illilouette Basin, where they have more of a natural fire regime. They allow lightning strike fires to burn. It's really deep in the backcountry, so humans are not such an issue. You can imagine this was an amazing place for bees. And so when we think of forests and bees, a lot of times the key aspect is wildfire. And this is actually looking at the rimfire burning and wondering if we should leave Yosemite from across the park over in the Illilouette. So remember, if you think, okay, right after a fire, who lives, who dies in terms of bee, remember how all those different types of nesting. If you are an above ground nester and you have something like a high severity fire that kills a lot of trees, you 100% die. But some ground nesting bees that nest deep enough probably survive. It's a little unclear, but it seems like heat doesn't travel that deep into the soil, and a lot of ground nesting bees actually have incredibly deep nests. But all the wood nesters will definitely be knocked out by a fire. So thinking about what we know about the Sierra Nevada and forest and wildfire, we know that burned forest patches have higher richness and abundance of flowering plants and bees than unburned forest. Biodiversities, the diversity of fire histories within an area. This can be diversity of severities like high severity, low severity, moderate severity, as well as time since fire, all increase flowering plant, bee, and interaction richness, promote community resistance to a drought, and increase bee nutrition. As the forest canopy closes post-burn, this leads to lower nesting success until you have a completely closed intact forest, where we see often complete nest failure. This was done with experimental nests, so people moving nests to certain areas and seeing if they would survive. High severity patches in general increase bee abundance and richness, but we're really not sure what this means when we're thinking about something like the rimfire, which has a huge high severity patch. And so bees, they mostly wiped out all the bees in the patch, so they're gonna have to colonize from outside the patch. That's actually what we're working on studying right now, not in the rimfire, but in Oregon. In general, high severity fires tend to decrease beta diversity, so you tend to get the same species over and over and over again, both of plants and of pollinators in these patches. Salvage logging, there's been one study done, tends to lower bee diversity, but not abundance. So there's only just been this one study done. It was incredibly done by a group at OSU. There was one other study that did not control for fire severity, so they found a really different effect, but it's important to control for fire severity, as you can imagine, because we have this really strong effect of high severity fires on bee richness and diversity. Great. Okay, chaparral. Love chaparral in California, except for the poison oak. What do we know about chaparral? I was actually surprised. I did a lot of literature searching. We do not know much, but one thing we know is that bees are extremely abundant in chaparral. They are often border agriculture in California, so they're important for exporting bees into fields for pollination. They are extremely heavily invaded by the European honeybee. When I've been out in chaparral, most of the bees I see is the European honeybee. They seem to really like those areas. And they also tend to be near maybe urban centers or agriculture, so goes to kind of follows that. Too frequent fires and the resultant invasion of non-native grasses and that kind of, continued frequent fire positive feedback loop is probably not good for bees, particularly as invasive grasses keep out the flowering plants. Oops. Moving on to desert. This is a gorgeous picture from the Mojave when it was blooming. Bee diversity in California deserts is extremely high. There are so many species of native bees in our deserts. Oases are often used for nesting and other resources. So like, for example, all those above ground nesters that need twigs or wood are often found nesting in the oases and then going out into the desert to forage. Soil and plant disturbances are likely harmful. I've noticed firsthand that ATVs that kill a lot of the delicate little plants, right on the layer of the desert, can utterly decimate the nectar and pollen availability in an area. We were working on BLM land, and then we went, I don't know, it was some very short distance into the state park, into Anza Borrego, and the difference in the abundance of bees that we caught was just crazy. And ATVs, of course, there was an ATV park nearby, but they tended to just kind of, disobey rules and go all over the place. So I think those types of subtle disturbances can be incredibly harmful. And there is really mixed and limited evidence on the effects of solar and wind farms. Some have found positive effects, some have found negative. Really what's tricky is a lot of times we put these things in really nice places where there's abundant flowers and great sun availability, for example. And so it's hard to find a control to pair, not a wind farm. And so it's difficult to know what the effects are. Also, this is just an adorable bee sleeping. It's a male bee sleeping inside of a desert poppy. I just wanted to share it. I'm sorry it's a blurry photo, but it was such a special moment. So sometimes they sleep in the closed up flowers. And lastly, we have grasslands. This is over by the Carrizo Plain. We know that overgrazing is harmful to bee abundance and richness, mostly because it keeps that floral diversity down. Intermediate grazing can increase floral diversity and thereby increase bee community diversity. And we know that invasive grasses, like many of the ones you see in this picture, limit nesting resources and floral resources. Bees often like bare ground to nest. And so when it's all cluttered up with either growing or those mats of grasses that the Eurasian grasses create, then there's not a lot of places for them to be. And of course, those grasses compete with the flowers. Oops. I think I'm going backwards. As you guys have probably noticed, there isn't a ton of information on our natural habitats. A lot of it is due to a lack of historical baseline data. We are working with Andy Muldanky and Ruben Alarcon at CSU Channel Islands. Andy Muldanky did a survey in the 1960s, early 1970s, where he went from a transect from an island to a high peak, and he collected so many insects, and particularly anything that touched the reproductive parts of a flower. There's over 100,000 uniquely identified bees in this survey and other pollinators. So we're in the process of redoing this survey, following his exact methods as much as we can. He was kind of crazy. He did a lot of sampling. Some of the data has been lost, unfortunately. He had a flood in his garage, but we're working on this, and we're hoping that this will help us identify which species are most vulnerable to land use change and other things going on in California, as well as those that are best able to deal with all the issues, all the changes we've been having. For example, Torrey Pines, when Andy sampled it in the 1960s, did not have a million houses around it. It was part of a really big area of coastal shrubland. So we'll see what's been going on with the bees after 50 years. Just going to throw out a couple slides about the other habitats we have, particularly the more working landscapes. So agricultural systems are really important in California. We know that we can install native plant hedgerows or floral strips, and these promote bees in these areas, as well as having landscape and cross diversity. There's lots of studies showing that organic agriculture has higher bee richness and abundance than more conventional agriculture, where there's a lot of pesticide and herbicide use. There's some interesting possibilities in terms of a bee better certification. They're trialing it they have it with almond now. So there's like bee friendly almonds, as well as using bees that are wild bees that could be honeybee alternatives. In terms of urban areas, we've seen, many studies have shown that green spaces and roofs or, any kind of garden or flowers that are native and produce pollen and nectar can be really helpful for promoting bees in these urban spaces. And with that, I would love to thank my lab and all the amazing people who've, helped me through this great journey, and take any questions via the chat. Yes.
Thanks, Lauren. I have a few questions that I pulled from the chat. From Robin Mitchell, can you discuss good grazing practices and what does that mean? And from Jason as a follow-up, what is an appropriate amount of grazing? Is this a function of period, number of animals, pairs, etc.?
I would say that everything that person said was true. I imagine it is context dependent. Really, it's all about when you think of good grazing practices for bees, it's the same as good grazing practices for promoting your forb and your flower and your native grass communities. So too much that can cause a lot of soil disturbance as well as erosion. Those things will hurt bees as well. Whereas if you just are, keeping that intermediate disturbance going, removing some of the invasive grasses from the system, having, little spaces for new plants to colonize, opening up soil, those things will help bees as well. But I imagine there are people who study just that in terms of rangeland management. So, the Xerces Society also has some interesting information on managing natural systems, and they have a little section on rangeless as well that might have more detailed specific information.
Great, thank you. And Greg wants to know if you can speak just a little bit about bees being proposed for listing in California.
Right. So there are 4 bumblebee species in California that were proposed to be listed. Where I heard last is that there was a lawsuit from grower groups that they did win, saying that at the state level, the Fish and Wildlife did not have the ability to list insects because the only invertebrates kind of included were fish on the kind of the original situation. But it's a really interesting, I think, a lot of times people have these ideas that if you have a bee on your farm and it's an endangered bee, you're going to have to completely shut down operations and, you might step on it. First of all, bees, you generally get out of the way. They don't really like to be stepped on. But also we don't tend to see those species in the depths of agricultural areas. I think people are really concerned about listing these species having implications for the types of pesticides and herbicides that can be sprayed. It might, on kind of the larger scheme of things, having grown up in the Central Valley and particularly in Fresno, I imagine there are other reasons as well to limit the spraying of pesticides and herbicides that might, in terms of humans, but it's just one of those things. There are a lot of other bees that should also be listed as well. We tend to know more about bumblebees because they're larger and have been maybe studied for longer, but we could probably list a huge number of species in California, and many have already gone extinct, particularly in really urban areas like San Francisco or in the deserts. There was a Timberlake. He was this bee taxonomist. He used to be part of the UC Riverside Entomology Museum. In the 1920s, he caught some ungodly number of these tiny, tiny little desert bees in Riverside. It was, many, many, many hundreds of native bees in Riverside. And I can tell you, after spending 4 years there, I maybe saw, a handful of species. It's been heavily invaded by the European honeybee. So.
Thank you, Lauren. And we only have about 1 more minute left for questions. So I'll go to Cindy Ressler, I hope I'm pronouncing your names correctly. And Cindy is asking any advice on interpreting nursery labels, the pollinator value of plants for sale. And she mentions also, I haven't noticed that the nursery labeled bee and hummingbird plants are particularly good at attracting our native bees.
It's yes, it's interesting. And a lot of it probably, one thing that is nice about the bee and hummingbird labels is it means this plant likely produces nectar and pollen, because a lot of what we plant in our gardens are cultivars and they don't produce any nectar and pollen. Roses are a great example of that. And because we've bred them not to produce pollen because we don't want, to cut them and bring them in our houses and sneeze a lot. But on the other end of the spectrum, you got to have the native bees to begin with to attract them. And depending on where you live, that may not be the case, right? If a lot of people have lawns or, ornamentals that don't produce any pollen or nectar, or someone's keeping honeybees a couple doors down that are keeping out any native bees from that area, then you often don't see the native bees kind of popping up. However, sometimes it can also take a couple years. Like imagine they need to find that, they need to find your garden, colonize it. They need to like find a nice place to nest. And so maybe in a couple of years, you'll start seeing them popping up, but sometimes it's not immediate. The Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation has some incredible guides to planting native plants in your yards. Like there's a great book called Attracting Native Pollinators, and they do have some region specific examples on there, as well as I think you can look up little like forums with region specific like good bees for different areas. Thank you guys.
Well, they have a lot of good questions. What I'm going to do is give you one more, have you pull down your slide presentation so we can get Scott's stage to go on. But then while he's getting ready, I'll let you answer the last question. Well, not the last question. Is there a native seed mix available for ranching, pasture, and promotion? And that's from Bill Lehman. For everybody out there, we'll try to have some question time at the very end of all of our presentations for those of you who didn't get your question answered. So again, Lauren, that is there a native seed mix available for ranching, pasture, and promotion?
Yeah, I would turn again to all of the incredible resources with the Xerces Society in terms of regionally specific seed mixes. They might have specific recommendations, but I know that they're out there. A lot of times it can be hard to find the right places to source them. So yeah, maybe shoot me an email. I can probably put you in contact with people who know more than me on that question, but they exist, I guess, is the key thing.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Lauren. I'm going to take you off the spotlight and I'm going to pull up Scott. And Scott, thank you so much for joining us today. Scott is with Wild Wings Backyard Nature Store in Sherman Oaks, California. And he was born and raised in Los Angeles and exploring the chaparral-clad Santa Monica Mountains since childhood. Birds have always been the focus of his attention, and he'll be talking with us today about hummingbirds. He leads birding excursions and works to help promote pollinator plants for hummingbirds and other species. So Scott, I will let you begin. I'm gonna find your camera.
All right, hearing on one.
Yeah, your camera's actually not on right now. There you go.
Okay, hi. All right, hello everybody. And thanks for that introduction, Susan. So what I'm going to do today is touch on the status and distribution of California's hummingbirds, talk a little bit about the plant families that these birds take advantage of, all of which can be purchased as seeds or plants from nurseries. And lastly, I'm going to give one example of the benefits of a healthy, diverse native ecosystem when it comes to redoing a non-native yard and converting it into a native yard. In other words, habitat restoration back to native. So with that, let's start here. Give me 1 second. All right. So what hummingbird species can we find throughout the California area? We have 6 expected hummingbird species in California. And they would include Rufous hummingbird. These are small, very aggressive hummingbirds. Adult males have basically a straight bill, a blazing red gorget, a green head, and a mostly brown or rufous body. And one way that you know for sure of a male rufous hummingbird is when it has a completely brown back. Unfortunately, they can also have a green back as well. And so does an Allen's hummingbird, so the ID becomes a bit trickier. Rufous hummingbirds, for the most part, are strictly migratory through California. This migration is conducted in a series of segments with intermediate refueling. So they'll hang out in somewhere for a week or so, refuel, put on fat reserves, and continue their migration. They winter in Mexico, and then they begin to move north as early as February. It's a quite drawn out migration, and it can keep going as long as April. Most males have left the breeding grounds by mid-June to July, and basically they move to higher elevations where flowers are more available. Females begin to leave the breeding grounds about a week or so after their young have fledged, and most birds are gone by July. When rufous hummingbirds are migrating through California, they can be found in most all habitats, but their southern migration, it's the montane meadows that are so important to them. And this is a really interesting graphic, and it basically shows that as rufous hummingbird migration moves north, it follows the coastal sort of region of the states. When they come back on their southern migration, they're basically coming through the Rockies and the Sierras. And the likelihood is what they're doing is they're tracking nectar opportunities with flower blooms. All right, so the next hummingbird we have here would be Allen's hummingbird. These are small, also very aggressive hummingbirds, and they look very similar to rufous hummingbirds. There's a few differences in them. Some of these differences can only be told by having them in your hand. But basically, adult males have a straight bill. They have a blazing red gorget in the correct light as well. Green head, a big difference is a green back, and mostly a rufous colored body. So most Allen's hummingbirds are short to medium distant migrants between breeding areas, and those breeding areas are coastal California, coastal Oregon, and they winter in Mexico. Their northbound migration begins in January, although the migration timing varies from year to year depending on winter rains, because that's going to influence nectar availability on their migration path. Males depart breeding territories as early as May or June, and juveniles depart breeding grounds after the adults, usually by July. The caveat to this migration cycle is there is now a year-round population established in Los Angeles County. There's always been a year-round population of Allen's hummingbirds on the Channel Islands, and it's not known if this new population in Los Angeles was created by descendants of the birds from the Channel Islands or of the migratory race of them. And right now, DNA analysis is taking place to answer that question. Allen's hummingbird's habitat includes moist, sort of narrow belt that is affected by summer fogs, coastal scrub vegetation, riparian shrubs and woodlands, and as well as residential neighborhoods. Next, we have Calliope hummingbird. And this would be the smallest bird that we have in North America. It's the second smallest hummingbird in the world. The adult males, they have this beautiful iridescent magenta gorget that's divided into these separate rays, and they can elevate these into this brilliant star display. If anyone's seen this, it's quite unforgettable. Their bodies are mostly green with tones of tan. So Calliope hummingbird's northern migration begins about March, and it can continue into May. And like rufous hummingbirds, they migrate in a series of segments, again with these intermediate refuelings. Southern migration of this bird is not fully understood, and it's likely that flower blooms play a big part in their movement after breeding. So their breeding course changes from year. I mean, excuse me, their migration route changes from year to year. Males live the breeding grounds while the females are still raising their young, probably in the beginning of June, and females begin their southern migration most likely in July. Calliope hummingbirds are predominantly a montane species of hummingbird, and what they like are aspen thickets and running streams and open montane forests. But when they're migrating north, their spring stopovers will include desert washes and low coastal mountains. So we'll get these coming through Los Angeles sometimes on their northern migration. So they'll stay coastal, normally never on their southern migration. Next would be Costus hummingbird. This is a mostly green hummingbird with a palish front. The adult male's head and gorget is an iridescent purple. And like the Calliope hummingbird, Costus can flare the gorget in a really striking manner. Costus hummingbirds basically expand their range during April and May, and then it contracts again around July through September. It's during this late summer period when these birds can show up almost anywhere in Southern California. Costus hummingbird's habitat includes Sonora and Mojave desert scrub, deserts and desert-like washes, mesas, especially where sages and yuccas and cholla cactuses are common. One thing that is interesting about this hummingbird, though, is, and I'm assuming that this is due to nectar resources, is at times they can be found almost anywhere in Southern California, probably chasing flower blooms. And they'll end up in chaparral, live oak woodlands, coastal scrub, oak savanna, almost anywhere in Southern California. Next would be black-chinned hummingbird. So this is kind of a slender looking hummingbird with a slightly decurved bill. Adult male's chin and upper throat are this velvety black color. And in the right light, they have a violet strip on the lower part of the throat. Another key idea of this hummingbird is that contrast of white below the purple throat and the white on its upper chest creates sort of a white collar. I liken it to, they look fancy and they're dressed up in a sort of a tuxedo shirt. Their body is a dull metallic sort of bronzy green, and their back is and their sides and belly are grayish white. So black-chinned hummingbirds are short to medium distant partial migrants. Adult males tend to arrive on breeding grounds by mid-April before the females. And as you can tell by this map, out of all of California's hummingbirds, black-chinned hummingbirds are the most widespread on the Western United States. Males disperse their sites and begin their southern migration before the females and the young, usually in July and August when food supplies are still plentiful and temperatures are remaining mild. Oops, excuse me. So black-chinned hummingbirds' food their habitat includes floodplains in riparian communities, tracts of deciduous trees along stream bottoms, especially in canyons. You can also find these in orchards and agricultural lands. Next would be Anna's hummingbird. This is a iridescent bronzy green hummingbird with a straightish bill, and in the correct light, male's head and gorget shine in a bright magenta color. So Anna's hummingbirds are basically residents in California. There is some movement and there is a little bit of migration, but it's sort of latitudinally instead of being north-south. It's the only hummingbird that breeds north in Mexico that has this type of movement. Their sort of post-breeding movement is extensive, and if they're in the mountains, they'll do a sort of a contraction down to lower elevations following flowers, and some birds actually move north after breeding, now all the way up into Vancouver. Now, what's really interesting is you can look at this abundance map, and you can see out throughout the year these birds move throughout California again following flower blooms. Anna's hummingbirds habitat includes chaparral, oak woodland, evergreen broadleaf habitat, riparian woodlands, savannas, coastal scrub. Essentially, most all of habitat in California can support Anna's hummingbirds. So those are our 6 expected hummingbirds found in California. Broad-billed hummingbird and broad-tailed hummingbird can occasionally end up in California, but they're quite uncommon. And as you could see by the maps, the range maps, hummingbirds can be found virtually in any part of California throughout the year. So I'd like to touch a little bit on California's flora. We've looked at the range maps of the hummingbirds of where they can show up. So what I'd like to now go through is sort of a calendar year of a few of California native plants that flower and provide food for hummingbirds. So if we're starting sort of at the beginning of the year, it would be fairy dusters. Fairy dusters, they flower nearly year round, but the blooms are most abundant from November to March. These plants are medium sized and grow about 5 feet high and 5 feet wide, and they readily self-propagate. So they will fill an area over time in a very, very nice way. Fairy dusters are also great for insect pollinators and the host for some butterfly species larvae. Next would be Dudleyias. They grow really well in coastal areas along rocky slopes and cliffs. And their flower stalks appear in late winter and early spring. And these plants range from about 6 inches to a few feet high. Next would be ribes. This particular ribes, fuchsia flowering gooseberry, blooms in late winter to early spring. They can reach a height of 6 to 10 feet, and they produce berries that a lot of other bird species like, so this is a great wildlife plant. And hummingbirds are important pollinators of gooseberry flowers. As you can see here, the anthers are making contact with the base of the hummingbird's bill, allowing pollen to collect and ultimately be transferred to another gooseberry flower. Next would be sages. Most all sages or salvias produce flowers on upright stems that hummingbirds and insect pollinators utilize. And sages will bloom from March until about midsummer. This particular sage is a hummingbird sage, and it blooms from about March until May. Next would be penstemon. Penstemons are perennial herbs that bloom from mid-spring to early summer. This particular one, firecracker penstemon, produces several, actually many, many blooms on erect stems. When they reach about 3 feet high, and they can fill fields with these flowers, providing tons of food to hummingbirds. And this is an immature Anna's hummingbird that had been feeding on penstemon nectar and has collected penstemon pollen on its bill and throat. So this is demonstrating how it's pollinating those flowers. Next would be Western columbine. This is a wild flower that prefers moist locations such as stream banks and meadows and blooms late spring into early summer. I associate this gorgeous flowering plant with California's foothills and mountains. Snapdragon. Snapdragons bloom from spring through midsummer. This happens to be island snapdragon, and it's a dense evergreen sprawling shrub that grows to about 3 to 4 feet in height. Wherever this grows, I see hummingbirds all over it. And fuchsia. California fuchsia flowers from midsummer through fall. So this is actually a very important pollinating, nectar plant for hummingbirds, because there's not a lot of other California native plants in bloom in late summer. And this particular fuchsia grows to about 3 or 4 feet in height. Again, this is another plant, when this is in bloom, it will be visited frequently by hummingbirds. And finally, on my short list of California native plants for hummingbirds would be manzanita. Their urn-shaped flowers bloom from fall through March. So this is a really important plant for providing food sources to early migrating hummingbirds. It's really drought tolerant and ranges from a low growing bush to a tall tree. And besides food and nectar sources, clean water is very important to hummingbirds, as collecting nectar is obviously a sticky business. Here too, calliope hummingbirds are taking a break from their migration to have a bath. Birds have an excellent memory for food and water resources along their migratory paths, and they'll return to these patches year after year. And for hummingbirds, a good water source means slow, shallow moving water. This male Anna's hummingbird is just finishing up on his bath. And for the final part of my presentation, I'd like to zoom into a single residential yard that's here in Los Angeles, and it's known as the Gottlieb Native Garden. And geographically, it's directly in the center of LA. If you were a bird flying in from the east, this would be the view of the property. The garden itself is about an acre, much of it terracing down a east-facing hillside. So over 30 years ago, the owners began a water conservation project in an effort to do their small part to save water that Los Angeles was removing from Owens Lake, which basically its ecosystem has been destroyed by this water use. Their conservation started with mostly Mediterranean drought-tolerant plants, although by chance, some California natives made it into the design, like the primrose in the bottom left part of this frame. But it was quickly apparent to the owners that most of the flora was not benefiting wildlife in any way. So instead of planting only Mediterranean drought-tolerant plants, they pivoted and started planting California native drought-tolerant plants. And it wasn't long before they realized that wildlife was arriving. Today, almost the entire property is landscaped in California natives, creating rich, small ecosystems. And this property has been transformed into one of the premier native gardens in California. So for the past 6 years, I've been documenting the wildlife that utilizes this space, as well as coordinating and participating in university-led study. And to date, I've been able to identify nearly 500 species of animals on this property. This would include small insects up to LA's largest mammals. We would only have to go a couple of houses away to probably find a quarter of those species in the non-native plantings. Over 100 species of birds are on that properties list, which of course include all of California's 6 expected hummingbird species, as well as the only raptor that I've personally seen catch a hummingbird out of the air, and that would be a sharp-shinned hawk, which is pictured here. So the garden's ability to attract and to provide for such a wide variety of animal species has caught the attention of researchers, educators, and a broad range of environmental groups, including the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles. Some of the universities carrying out studies in the garden would include Loyola Marymount University, UCLA, Cal Poly, Occidental College, specifically the Moore Lab of Zoology, and the University of California, Davis. So out of all the universities, UC Davis has the longest running research program in the garden. And Dr. Lisa Tell's Hummingbird Health and Conservation Program has used the garden for a study site since 2014. And I've been personally collaborating with them since 2015. Essentially, hummingbirds are netted and processed. Now, one thing that's very interesting about California hummingbirds is that many immature and female hummingbird species are really difficult to tell apart from each other unless you actually have them in your hand. And for some of our male species of hummingbirds, the only way to get 100% positive ID on the bird would be to have that bird in your hand. So basically, all vitals are taken and documented. Blood, nail, and feather samples for DNA analysis are taken. The final procedure is to surgically insert a tiny pit tag under the skin on the bird's back. The birds then released back into the garden where they're tracked by 6 strategically placed antennas. Over the past 6 years, the program has banded or tagged over 1,000 of the garden's hummingbirds. And UC Davis's groundbreaking work on the health and social relationship of hummingbirds has been published in many peer-reviewed journals. This one urban garden continues to prove without a doubt that we can support native wildlife by simply planting California natives and restoring California native habitat. Just think of what could be accomplished if we expanded this concept throughout entire California. So thank you very much for my presentation, and I'm here to answer any questions that you guys have.
Thank you so much, Scott. That was wonderful. And did you take all those photos? Scott is also a photographer.
The majority of the photos in that presentation were mine, yes.
Excellent. Those are beautiful. So just a couple questions for you, and then we're right on time right now. So the first question is from James Casey. Rufus, could Rufus be an indicator in British Columbia for urban biodiversity planning? And that is, would there be a response if they were to plant more native plants?
I would say yes. I think that Rufus hummingbirds are very connected to native flowers. You know, just like native pollinators, the majority of native pollinators are, they know what to do with them. When they realize what, if they're looking at a native flower that they have evolved with, they immediately use it. So yes, it is a positive effect. Okay,
great. And then Hillary Sardinas asks about the form of the plant, or the morphology. And so tubular red native flowers in planting should provide nectar and support hummingbirds.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, overall, hummingbirds will go to any colored flower, but they appear to prefer red flowers because I believe the majority of insects that would use those red flowers for pollen do not key in on the red color or are unable to see the red color. And it leaves more nectar for the hummingbirds themselves. So hummingbirds seem to spend more time on red tubular flowers because there's more nectar available to them.
Thanks. And I'm going to let you do the last two while I get Kat ready and do a poll. From Jeanette, can you recommend any books for native planting for pollinators? And from Allie, the name again of the native garden in LA, and do they sell native plant seeds?
I'll answer the second question first. It's the Gottlieb Native Garden. It's in Los Angeles. It's a private garden and they don't sell any plant seeds. But what they use it for is a study site for what can be done with habitat restoration. They do give private tours if anyone's in Los Angeles and wants to have a look at it. You can go to their website and there's a contact form there. As for native pollinating plants, the Xerces Society has a great resource for it. California Native Plant Society, I believe on their website have great resources, as well as I know here in Los Angeles, the Theater Payne Native Plant Society has a great website with resources.
Wonderful. Thank you so much again, Scott. And if you can hang in there till the end, we'd love it to answer any more questions people might have.
Sure.
All right. So I'll let you go off and we're going to present Kat Darst. So Kat, if you are ready with your presentation. Kat is, let me pull up her bio. Kat is the field supervisor for listing and recovery with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in California. She supports species status assessment development, Endangered Species Act listing decisions, and recovery plan formulation and implementation for at-risk, threatened, and endangered species. So thank you very much, Kat, for coming on to share with us information about monarch butterfly and its status in California. And if you guys could all take if you can see the poll and you can answer that, that would be wonderful. I'll keep it up for just a minute while Kat gets her presentation up and camera on, I believe, Kat.
Can you see my presentation and hear me okay?
Yes, perfectly. Thank you.
Great. Cool. I'd really like to thank Lauren and Scott for great bee and hummingbird presentations. I loved all the pictures and the information. That was awesome. And thanks, Susan, for having me. So as Susan said, I'm with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and I'm happy to talk with you today about the monarch butterfly 12-month finding. So that's a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service finding related to the Endangered Species Act. And so this is about the Federal Endangered Species Act. There is also a California Endangered Species Act, and that's what Lauren was talking about in relation to whether or not insects can be listed. So, so this is on the Federal Endangered Species Act side. Okay, so there's a web address on this. You can find all the info that I'm going to present here and more. There's also this email address, so you can send comments, questions, suggestions to the service at large if you want. And of course, I'm also happy to take any specific questions. Cool, so this presentation, you have 3 monarch presentations today. And so what I'm going to do is a high level overview kind of about the monarch butterfly, its range, population migration. I'll talk about the petition to list the monarch, the process we followed, and what our warranted but precluded finding means. And then I'll close by highlighting monarch conservation efforts, but really I think Stephanie and Stephanie are gonna get into the details of some of that. Okay, great. So as most of you know, monarch migration is an amazing phenomenon. So in the spring, adults migrate from wintering grounds in Mexico for the eastern population. So that's the blue dot there in Mexico. And then from coastal California for the western population. So that's the sort of blue blob there along the coast. And through several generations, monarchs migrate as far north as Canada. And then adults, 3 or 4 generations removed from the individuals that began the trip in the spring, they travel the entire distance back to wintering grounds. And then these are the monarchs that will begin the northward migration the following spring. So these 2 populations, the western and the eastern population, these are the migratory monarch populations. But monarch butterflies have expanded across the globe to 29 countries. It's mostly naturalized populations that don't migrate, that came from these migratory populations. But just to give you some sense of what our listing assessment had to look at, we had to look at monarchs globally. But again, the origins for monarchs worldwide are these long distance migratory populations found in Eastern and Western North America. And they were the main focus of our assessment. And for just a little bit more context, the Eastern population historically and currently supports over 90% of the world's monarchs. So even when the Western population was doing well, it was still a small fraction of migratory monarchs. Still super important, but just that context of how many monarchs migrate through the middle of the country, I think is important for the biology of the species. So as these graphs show, monarch butterflies have been in decline for at least the past 20 years. The Eastern and Western monarch migratory populations are measured by estimating their populations at the overwintering sites in Mexico and California each year. And that makes sense. You can count them when they're all sort of congregated together overwintering. So the graph on the top of the orange bars shows the numbers for the Eastern population. And then the graph on the bottom with the green bars, it shows the numbers for the Western population. So monarchs in the Eastern population, they cluster in massive numbers in a small area in the mountains of central Mexico. And so it's really hard to count them individually. So instead, the population is estimated by the size of the area it occupies. So the little numbers on top of those orange bars are area estimates. And so just for some sense of the area to number of monarchs conversion, the numbers dipped to a low of about 14 million monarchs in 2013. So the tiniest bar there in 2013 equates to about 14 million monarchs. The wintering monarchs in coastal California have seen a more precipitous decline from about 1.2 million in 1997 to fewer than 30,000 in 2019. So the last green bar on this graph is 2019 because this is from our species status assessment. So the 2020 numbers aren't even included. And the 2020 numbers indicate that fewer than 2,000 monarchs were at the overwintering sites this year. So I think this graph is can be a little bit misleading because the green bars are the numbers of monarchs, but that blue line is survey effort. So the numbers of monarchs has gone down as we've looked more places for them. And again, we've continued to look more places for them, and we only found 20,000 overwintering monarchs in 2020. So really very, very serious. And you know, there's no known single cause for the drop in monarch numbers, particularly in the West, but there's definitely multiple contributing factors that we've identified. So this includes habitat loss and degradation in general, both at the overwintering groves and in the breeding areas, insecticide use, and then a change in climate. So we've got drought, increased storm frequency and severity, and temperature extremes. So in August 2014, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service received a petition to list the monarch butterfly under the Endangered Species Act. We made a substantial 90-day finding on the petition in December 2014. And then after a bunch of back and forth, we worked with the plaintiffs to extend the deadline for our 12-month finding, which is our kind of finding on the listing, to December 15th, 2020. And this allowed us to gather additional years of overwintering data for our assessment. So our finding was released December of last year. So this is all pretty recent. And so what is a species status assessment? What do we do for our 12-month finding? So it's the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's framework to use the best available science to identify species needs, assess information on status, threats, and conservation efforts, and then we project the future status of the species. So I was the Western representative on the Monarch SSA core team. So we had U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services biologists across the country on that team, and we also had representatives from the Midwest, Northeast, and Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. So we were lucky enough to also specifically for California have someone from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife on our team. So lots of expertise. And the final SSA, species status assessment, which is available on that website on my first slide, if you're interested in reading all the details, it describes the positive and negative influence on the future condition of monarchs, and then it projects the future outcomes based on simulations. So shown on the slide are the different things that influence monarch viability. And like I said, these things were incorporated into some simulations to project the probability of persistence. So, so the graphs here show the results of our population simulations. The gray cone on each graph represents the probability of extinction over time, given each population's current size, growth rate, environmental stochasticity levels. And then the blue cone superimposed over the gray cone is the probability of extinction under plausible future scenarios. And so what these graphs show is that the probability of extinction of monarch butterflies, both the eastern population shown on the left and the western population shown on the right, it climbs when projected over time. So it varies from 24 to 46% probability of extinction for the eastern population in the next 30 years, and then up to 92 to 95% probability of extinction for the western population in the next 30 years. I mean, so this is, like I said, this is very serious. Population sizes are going to continue to decline for both populations, and in an extreme way in the West, which makes these populations more vulnerable to stochastic and catastrophic events, such as extreme storms or widespread drought. So, so these numbers are definitely very serious, especially for the West. So we have a monarch conservation database. This wasn't my primary responsibility, so I may have a tough time answering questions about this, but if you would like answers about this, I certainly can send you to the right people. But so basically it's a tool where people could input conservation efforts that they had either completed or were planning to complete that we could take into account in our listing assessment. And there was heaps of conservation efforts that were incorporated there. And The database remains open. And so people can continue to add information to that as we continue to understand the status and conservation efforts on the ground of monarch butterflies. Okay, so there's 3 outcomes to the Endangered Species Act petition process. So there's 3 possible 12-month findings. The first is that the 12-month finding can be warranted. And if that's the finding, we publish a proposed rule to list the species as endangered or threatened, and then we open a public comment period. We can also find that listing is not warranted, which means that the process stops without a proposed listing. We just say not warranted. And then finally, we may determine that listing is warranted, but precluded by listing actions of a higher priority. And this is the finding that we made for the monarch in December. So through our national listing work plan, we prioritize our workload based on the needs of candidate and petition species. This balancing act has to do with the level of endangerment of the entire entity to which we're having to assess, plus potential conservation efforts. And so through that matrix weighting process, that's how we got to the warranted but precluded decision for monarchs. And I'm definitely happy to take questions on that. Okay, so with that warranted but precluded finding, the monarch butterfly becomes a candidate species. So a candidate is a thing under the Endangered Species Act, so it goes on the candidate list. And this means that the Fish and Wildlife Service will review the monarch status every year to determine if its listing priority should change. And we've added it to the National Listing Work Plan for 2024, when we would intend to issue a proposed rule if listing is still warranted at that time. And, you know, of course, we strongly encourage continued conservation efforts to improve the status of monarchs, because as we have to evaluate its status annually, we can take that into account. So since most of us on the call are really just interested in Western monarchs, I thought I'd end with like a little teaser slide that has the highest priority actions to save Western monarchs, because I know that Stephanie are going to go into a lot of detail about the hows and the whys of this, but just to get us going here. So protect and restore remaining overwintering groves, plant native milkweed and nectar plants in breeding habitat, especially early season emerging milkweed and nectar plants in California's Coast Range and Central Valley. So that would be the area where the monarchs coming off the overwintering groves would be seeking habitat for breeding in the very, very late winter, early spring. Eliminate or reduce the use of pesticides, particularly insecticides when possible. Report all monarch and milkweed observations, especially in the spring. So this would be either Western Monarch Milkweed Mapper or the iNaturalist app. And finally, manage and enhance breeding and migration habitat across all Western states. So with that little teaser, you know, the service is really, we are promoting an all hands on deck approach to Western monarch conservation. It's dire. We're hoping that it's not all is lost. So we really think that now's the time and we should all band together and try to do something good to save the Western monarchs. So I think we probably have some time for questions. I'm not sure, Susan, let me know.
Oh, you're right at your time. And thanks so much. That was a great presentation. Let me see if I didn't see any questions, just a lot of comments, but here's one from Jose. Is there a native milkweed species that grows in silt clay soils? I heard they prefer sandy soils.
I think that's a great Stephanie question, and they may talk about kind of the different milkweeds that you should be planting in the different areas.
Okay, wonderful. And then Robin Mitchell says, I have read that Art Shapiro from UC Davis thinks that climate change is one of the factors affecting the Western monarch population. Can you respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, Art would know. He's got years and years of data. Yeah, I mean, certainly the droughts are huge, right? Because it's what our other presenters have talked about, in the sense that it's all about these nectar resources. It's all about the flowers. It's all about the plants. And so if you don't have any rain, you're going to lose that, and therefore you're going to lose everything that is dependent on those. So drought is a huge problem, but sort of extreme storm events, while while the monarchs are clustered at overwintering sites, can also be detrimental because they are all clustered together. So you can lose a lot of them all at once. So as the severity of these environmental events increases with climate change, the risk to monarchs, all monarchs, both North American populations, but the West in particular, because as the population shrinks, any environmental perturbation that affects them negatively is going to have a huge effect if there's only a few of them left. So it's a really big deal. Climate change is a thing.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kat. And I'll go on and bring on our next speaker. And again, Kat, if you have time to stay on and can take more questions at the end, a few more started filtering through. So our next presenter will be speaking about the Western monarch butterfly. Stephanie McKnight is the endangered species conservation biologist with the Xerces Society. And she works on the Western population of monarch butterflies, including the development of best management practices for monarchs and pollinators on public lands. She's worked as a botanist with the U.S. Forest Service in California and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in Oregon prior to her current position with the Xerces Society. So thank you so much, Stephanie, for joining us today. I'm not hearing you, Stephanie. Let's see, let me pull up.
Thanks. Yeah, can you hear me?
Now I've got you. And are you going to turn on your camera or leave it off?
I think I'm going to leave it off. I get distracted by seeing my little face pop up.
Okay.
I think so. Yeah, thanks to everybody joining today. Thanks, Susan, for the introduction, and thanks, Kat, for the great overview of the status of Western monarchs and monarch butterflies in North America in general. I'm a conservation biologist with the Xerces Society, and I've been working on Western monarch conservation since 2016. So I have a lot of experience working with Western monarchs. In case you aren't familiar with the Xerces Society, we are an international nonprofit organization dedicated to the conservation of invertebrates and their habitat. We're a science-based conservation organization. We have core 4 programs focused on pollinators, endangered species, aquatic invertebrates, and pesticides. And the Xerces Society formed in the 70s and was named after the Xerces blue butterfly, which is the first butterfly to go extinct from human causes in North America. And since then, the Xerces Society has expanded to focus on many other invertebrates. So today I'm just going to provide a brief overview of Western monarch biology. I'm going to talk about what monarch habitat looks like in California. I'm going to talk about some habitat suitability models for monarchs and milkweed in the Western United States. I'm going to cover priority restoration zones in California for recovering Western monarchs. And then I'm going to highlight some best management practices that are available for land managers to manage land for monarchs. So Kat already did a great overview of describing what we mean when we talk about a Western monarch. Like she said, there are 2 migratory populations of monarchs in North America. And today I'm just focusing on the Western population. And generally we think of that Western population as the butterflies that breed west of the Continental Divide and then overwinter in groves of trees along the California coast. And we know where monarch butterflies originate that overwinter on the California coast from several studies, one of which is the central graph that you see on the screen. And that's an isotopic signature study by Louis Yang that shows that monarch butterflies at overwintering sites on the California coast originate from various parts of the Western United States, as you can see from that little circle pie chart. We also know migratory pathways of monarch butterflies at overwintering sites from tagging efforts. Basically, tagging is just researchers or community scientists stick a little sticker on the hind wing of a monarch butterfly, and then we can track their migration patterns of where they go. And so you can see on the map on the left that monarch butterflies from the west end up at overwintering sites in California, with the exception of Arizona, where you can see that monarch butterflies have been documented going both to coastal overwintering sites in California and to central Mexico, which is super cool. So really quick, just monarch life cycle so everybody understands basic monarch biology. We've already talked about the fact that monarch butterflies overwinter in groves of trees along the California coast, and you can see that in the map as the light blue wintering habitat. And so they spend several months as adults clustered in groves of trees along the California coast. And then during the spring and summer months, they're breeding in the inland parts of the West. And they've been documented breeding in every single state in the Western United States. And so their breeding and migratory habitat is pretty much widespread across the West. Monarch butterflies require milkweeds as their host plant. They cannot develop without milkweeds or plants in the genus Asclepias. The adults will lay eggs on the milkweed plants. Those then become larvae, which goes through 5 instars, which become chrysalis, and then becomes an adult. And that whole process takes about a month. But like I said, monarchs require milkweed to develop, and they sequester toxic compounds that are in the milkweed that are called cardenolides. And those toxic compounds help deter predation. From recent research, we've learned that the Western monarch population kind of is more of an expanding population versus a shifting populations. And what I mean by that is in the East, monarch butterflies move in these successive generations, and they continue to move northward as the summer breeding season progresses. Whereas in the Western population, we see more of an expanding population. So when they leave the overwintering sites in the California coast, they move inland and they start breeding in, let's say, the Coast Range of California or the Central Valley, and they continue to breed there year round. They don't continue to move north like they do in the Eastern population. So once breeding starts in a region in the West, it generally continues through the whole season. So monarch habitat in California consists of 2 main things. There's the overwintering habitat, which we've talked about a lot, and then breeding and migratory habitat. So the overwintering habitat, Western monarchs spend the winter months as adults on coastal groves of trees that have very specific microclimatic conditions. There are over 400 overwintering sites that have been documented on the California coast from Mendocino down to Baja, Mexico. They spend approximately October to February at the overwintering sites. And during this time, adults are in reproductive diapause for the winter with a few exceptions. The butterflies cluster in these dense groups on branches of leaves. And then in February, the surviving monarchs will start to breed if they haven't already done that over the winter. And then they will disperse inland to find milkweed to start the next generation of monarchs. So overwintering habitat for monarchs is coastal groves of trees on the California coast. There are a few exceptions. There are some cool inland sites in California that are really neat. And there are some overwintering sites in Arizona as well that are pretty cool. The second part of habitat in California for monarchs is Western monarch breeding habitat, and features of high quality monarch habitat include native milkweed. That's the larval food, and adults also really like nectaring on native milkweed. Native flowering plants, and that's to fuel the adults. Adults really need nectar. Adults are generalists. They'll feed on a wide variety of species. And then monarchs also need trees and shrubs as roost sites. And from some preliminary research that I've been involved in with Cheryl Schultz at Washington State University, we've also found that monarchs may prefer to lay eggs on milkweed plants that are partially shaded or in full shade during the hottest times of the year in the middle of the summer. And so it's also important to think about monarch habitat by restoring habitat or protecting habitat, especially where there's shade. So in the summer months when it's over 100 degrees, monarch butterfly larvae probably do better during development if they have a little bit cooler conditions, and that can be from shade from trees or shrubs. And then finally, they just need habitat that's free from pesticides and disease. So when we talk about Western monarch breeding habitat, what we're talking about really is milkweed. So there is a huge diversity of milkweed species in North America, and in the Western United States, there are about 44 species, depending on whether you accept certain subspecies and all of that. And in California, there are 15 native milkweeds. They grow in a wide variety of habitats from, grasslands to woodlands to riparian areas and to deserts. So the milkweeds are found all over California, a wide variety of habitats, and monarchs have been documented using the majority of these as larval hosts. So wherever there is milkweed, that is monarch breeding habitat. And to see where monarchs and milkweed have been documented in the Western United States, you can use the Western Monarch Milkweed Mapper, which is an online community science database. This database was created by crowdsourcing data from a variety of sources, including agencies such as Fish and Wildlife Service and the Forest Service and BLM. They all contributed data. And it was developed through partnership with the Xerces Society, Idaho Department of Fish and Game, Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and others to develop this big database that we then turned into an online community science platform. So data from this platform has been used to develop a variety of resources for managing habitat for monarchs. It was used to develop habitat suitability models. It was used to develop best management practices for monarch butterflies in the Western United States, and has been used in a wide variety of ways. Anybody can create an account and contribute data to this. So I encourage anybody that may observe monarchs or milkweed or have land that they know where these monarchs and milkweed occur to please submit data. We have an option for land managers to be able to submit large quantities of data. So there's a batch upload form. So if you're an agency staff person and you have a large amount of data of milkweed occurrences or monarch occurrences, you can submit that. So it's really great. All of the data from this database also can be downloaded as a KML, Excel, or CSV file. So that can be used for land management purposes as well. And I just want to point out that the Western Monarch Milkweed Mapper website has a huge amount of information on it to be able to help you in terms of just understanding basic monarch biology, monarch conservation, the status of the monarch population. The website has individual profiles for each milkweed species. You can sort it by state, so you can sort by California and then see all the native milkweed species by state, and each profile will show you a range map of where that species occurs in California, where it's been documented. The website also has great resources for monarch nectar plant guides, milkweed guides, and best management practices for monarchs. Like I mentioned earlier, the Western Monarch Milkweed Mapper database of milkweed and monarch records was used to develop habitat suitability models. And those models were a partnership with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Xerces Society, and University of Nevada, Reno. And the habitat suitability models were published in Frontiers in Ecology and Evolution in 2019. So if you want to check it out, you can check out the publication. And some key takeaways from the models are that monarch breeding and migratory habitat is widespread across the West. And while that might sound simple to us all now, just a few years ago, we didn't really know very much about monarchs in the Western United States. And so this is a huge feat. And we also found out from the habitat suitability models that there's notable concentrations of very highly suitable habitat for monarchs in the Coast Range, Central Valley, and foothills of the Sierra Nevada of California. So you can see like the dark orange in the map is the highly suitable habitat. I also want to point out that these models are available in most corporate GIS data files for the Forest Service and BLM, so they should be accessible for agency staff. Or if you're not part of an agency and you want to use the habitat suitability models for conservation efforts, you can contact monarchs@xerces.org to get a copy of the habitat suitability models that can be used in GIS. So to sort of better understand how to restore and protect habitat for monarchs in California, we kind of have to understand when monarchs are most vulnerable and what periods of their life cycle should be targeted for recovery. And so we know that monarchs are most vulnerable during the overwintering period and in the late winter and early spring, when they leave the overwintering sites and are beginning to move inland to find milkweed to start the next generation. So from monarch breeding phenology research in California, we were able to see that the decline in the monarch population that happened in 2018, so the population declined from about 300,000 to only 30,000 in 1 year. And we found that we think that decline happened between the overwintering period and when they started breeding in California in April. And the population hasn't really recovered since that huge decline. So we know they're really sensitive during the overwintering period, the late winter and early spring. Another study that came out of the University of Nevada, Reno and UC Davis found that monarch declines are most severe in early March as well. So we have several research projects showing that monarchs are very vulnerable during this period. So understanding when they're most vulnerable can help us come up with ways the best strategies to conserve Western monarchs and manage their habitat. So where do they need habitat and when do they need it? In response to the large population decline of the Western monarch population that happened in 2018 that I just mentioned, the Xerces Society developed a Western Monarch Call to Action, which highlights 5 key steps to help recover the western monarch population. The first is to protect and manage California overwintering sites. I think Kat mentioned that earlier. Restore breeding and migratory habitat in California, especially in areas where the first generation goes, so where they go as soon as they leave overwintering sites. So that's mostly like Coast Range of California and Central Valley. Protect monarchs and their habitat from pesticides, and then protect, manage, and enhance their summer breeding and fall migration habitat outside of those areas. So basically everywhere else in the West. And then to answer key research questions about how best to aid Western monarch recovery. And one thing you can do to help us answer key research questions is to submit data to the Western Monarch Milkweed Mapper. That online community database is used by researchers and agencies to help us better understand the Western monarch population to develop good conservation strategies. So please consider contributing to that. The other thing you could consider participating in California is the Western Monarch Thanksgiving Count. And that's an annual community science effort to assess the population of Western monarchs and California coastal groves. So you can look that up and participate as well. And you can read the full call to action at savewesternmonarchs.org if you want to read the whole thing. So I mentioned that by understanding when monarchs are most vulnerable, we can come up with good conservation strategies to help recover the population. And so this year, because the population dropped to less than 2,000 butterflies overwintering at coastal groves in California, the Xerces Society worked with Fish and Wildlife Service, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, WAFWA, researchers, and other organizations to develop a simple priority restoration zone map for California to help recover the population. That's the map you see on your screen. So the first two priority areas are to protect and restore overwintering habitat and plant pesticide-free native nectar plants along the coastal area where the core amount of monarchs still overwinter. So that's the light green. And then the other piece of the priority one is in the monarchs' early breeding zone. So where they go first when they leave overwintering sites is to protect and plant pesticide-free early season native milkweed and nectar plants. And then priority two is to basically protect and restore their habitat outside of those areas. So part of priority one is to protect and plant early season native milkweed, as I showed on the map in the previous slide. So restoring early season milkweed in Western California is a high priority to recover the Western monarch population. So on this table, you can see the earliest emerging milkweed species in California and where they occur in the state. So based on available phenology data for these native milkweed species, we know that the earliest emerging species in California are California milkweed, Asclepias californica, heartleaf milkweed, Asclepias cordifolia, woolly pod milkweed, Asclepias eriocarpa, and then in Southern California, desert milkweed, Asclepias arosa, will emerge quite early as well. So these early season milkweeds provide crucial breeding habitat for the first generation of monarchs that are born from the eggs laid by the overwintering generation. And in order to accomplish this priority one goal of getting more early season milkweed and nectar on the landscape for monarchs, in California, Xerces is working with partners in the native plant industry to increase commercial availability of these species, because right now they're pretty limited. It's pretty difficult to find some of the early emerging milkweed species commercially available for restoration at this time, especially if you want a ecoregion specific plant material for a region to do restoration. It will be really difficult to find that. So we're working on increasing the commercial availability of those species so that we can increase the amount of habitat that's on the landscape for monarchs in that area, that in that blue area on this map, to help recover the population, because we think that that's when they're most vulnerable, and we think that's when we can have the greatest impact on increasing the population. The second part of priority one is to protect and restore overwintering habitat. And I wanted to highlight that US Forest Service does manage and have 3 overwintering sites on the California coast on the Los Padres National Forest. And just this last winter, the US Forest Service partnered with Fish and Wildlife Service and Xerces to plant 40 native trees to restore Plaskett Creek Campground for overwintering monarchs in 2020. And they were able to get all the trees planted with a fire crew that was already in the area for the Dolan fire. The Xerces Society has also partnered with the Los Padres National Forest to develop a site management plan for the monarch overwintering site at Plaskett Creek Campground. And so the Forest Service is actively involved in managing and restoring monarch overwintering sites. And so to achieve these priority targets that I've highlighted for restoring and recovering, or for recovering the Western monarch population, to achieve these priority targets to restore and protect monarch habitat, land managers need best management practices. And so I just wanted to highlight that there are several best management practices documents available for both monarch overwintering habitat and breeding habitat. The first is Managing Monarchs in the West. That's the document that you see in the middle. This document includes comprehensive BMPs for managing public land for monarchs. The other two documents provide guidance for protecting, managing, and restoring overwintering habitat on the California coast, protecting California's butterfly groves, and state of the monarch butterfly overwintering sites in California. And part of the BMPs for managing monarch habitat is timing management to cause the least amount of harm to monarchs. So this map shows the recommended timing for management, such as mowing, burning, et cetera, by ecoregion in the West. And these recommendations were developed using the best available phenology data for where monarchs are at specific times of the year in the West. I do want to point out their approximate recommendations every year is different depending on the monarch migration and when they are in specific regions. Timing may vary from year to year, but in general, these are conservative recommendations for when to time management so that you won't either harm monarchs directly or their habitat. And this map is part of the best management practices managing for monarchs in the West. It's also a standalone handout that you can download from the Xerces website as well. One example for why this is so important is in the picture here, you'll see a monarch larvae that I observed along with a dozen more on a patch of showy milkweed on a roadside. And unfortunately, this patch of milkweed was mowed a week later and all of the monarch larvae were killed. But it's just one example of how by simply just adjusting mowing to occur when monarchs are not present in a site, you can have a huge impact on the population. So land managers can reduce harm to monarch butterflies. And there are millions of acres of roadside habitat mowed in the West every year. So just avoiding patches of milkweed, for example, or just adjusting the timing can have a huge impact. So it's just one example of how to use the best management practices that we've developed. I also want to point out that there's another resource to help guide management, and that is the Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, or WAFWA, developed the Western Monarch Butterfly Conservation Plan. The plan was developed for 2019 through 2069, and it's to identify and promote a shared set of coordinated ecosystem-based conservation strategies across all partner agencies to achieve a vision of a viable monarch population in the West. So it has a lot of really great information about threats to monarchs and how to manage habitat. So I highly recommend that if you're interested in that, you should check it out. They also developed a crucial habitat area tool or chat tool. That's the map that you'll see on the right. So just another really good resource. And with that, I hope I've inspired all of you to get engaged in some of our priority restoration activities in California of restoring and protecting overwintering habitat and breeding habitat in California. Western monarchs are at a critical level, and I think we all, like Kat said, it's an all hands on deck. We all need to come together and do what we can to help recover the population of Western monarchs. But I always like to end and say that it isn't just about restoring and protecting habitat for monarch butterflies. You know, they're one of our most iconic species of butterfly in North America, and they're widespread. And if they're declining, then we know all other pollinators and invertebrates are declining as well. And so I just like to point out that milkweed that monarchs rely on is incredible habitat for so many other cool species like bumblebees and other butterflies and wasps. And they even are used by hummingbirds, which were talked about earlier. So with that, I just want to say that all the resources I mentioned today are available at the Xerces website at xerces.org/monarchs. Xerces also has a publication library that you can search by keyword, and we have a YouTube channel with videos talking about a lot of invertebrate conservation issues. And you can always email monarchs@xerces.org with questions. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie Frischi, who's going to talk about how to actually do restoration on the ground for pollinators and monarchs in California.
Thanks. And do you want to, Stephanie McKnight, do you want to go straight to Stephanie, or do you want to take a question or two?
If there are lots of questions, we can take questions. That's fine.
Okay, we'll wait then until after. Is that what you're saying? Wait until the next presentation?
Sure, we can wait. Yeah.
Okay, great. So Stephanie Frischi is the native plant materials specialist with the Xerces Society, and she provides pollinator habitat expertise to farms in Canada and the United States. She also works with the native seed industry and researchers to plan and develop seed supply of important plant species for restoration of insect habitat. So thank you very much, Stephanie, for this presentation. And Stephanie Frischi, if you could turn your camera on, we did have a comment from some people that it really helps to be able to see you.
Sure. Whoops, how's my sharing? I think I'm gonna have to.
Have your screen up. I don't see your camera. And Stephanie McKnight, your camera's still up for me. I'm not sure why. Ah, there you go. Thank you.
Are you a presenter view or a notes view?
You're good. You're up now.
Okay. So yeah, I'm rounding up the day here after a lot of great presentations, and I'm here to provide all the resources about ecological restoration, habitat work, native plants and seeds, and update about some of the other projects that we're doing around pollinators in California and also Western monarchs. So with monarch conservation, again, just to summarize, what can we do? We can plant native milkweeds, also native nectar plants, and provide flowers throughout the growing season, the breeding season. Also avoid and reduce our pesticide use, contribute observations to community science efforts, limit mowing, support agriculture that also supports monarchs and other wildlife. Be Better certified was mentioned earlier, and that's the website is there for anyone who wants to go there and learn more about the products that are being farmed and grown in a bee-friendly way. We can build community support by talking with our neighbors, our governments, and other landholders and land managers in our area. And also, as we're able contribute financially to conservation efforts.
Stephanie, I'm going to interrupt for just a minute. It doesn't look like your slides are forwarding. Yep. We're still on the cover slide.
Yeah, that's what I thought was going to be a problem. So
can you go to the start from current slide so that you're showing the full presentation? You also have a little bit of a rough connection there, so.
Okay. Sorry, everyone. Susan, could you tell me what you're seeing now?
No slide program. Okay, now I see your slide program. It's still not in, and it is changing screens. It's not in presentation mode. There you go. All right, perfect.
How about now?
Yes.
Okay, and all right. Let me know if it doesn't forward. But talking a bit about ecological restoration or habitat restoration, and there a resource I want to direct everyone to, if you're not familiar with, is SER, the Society for Ecological Restoration. And this is an international professional organization who helps land managers and researchers and conservationists restore ecological systems. So this is, people have whole careers in this. I'm not going to try to cover this in a 20-minute talk, but for those of you who are not yet familiar with SER, I just wanted to let you know about the existence of that group, and there are a lot of great resources on their website. And I'm also actively involved with a subsection of SER, which is the International Network for Seed-Based Restoration. Especially that's for areas of the world or habitats that are so degraded that they cannot be recovered just through management alone, but plants need to be added back to them, either through seeds or through transplanting. And SER has a nice publication, which is the International Principles and Standards for the Practice of Ecological Restoration. It's a really nice guide for both beginners and experts to just follow the steps from planning to site prep, all the way through management and monitoring. Our group with the International Network also recently published a series of scientific articles in a special issue of Restoration Ecology. And this is open access, so you don't need any subscription. It's completely free. Anyone can search on like the title that I have highlighted here in orange, or use that DOI number to find this issue. And then there's a series of articles which again provide a background and steps for each phase, from planning and sourcing where you'll get seeds, to maybe collecting or producing native seeds, ensuring quality, which is both cleaning them and testing, what you need to know about seed storage, also information about how seeds work inside of themselves, dormancy and germination, and then seed enhancement, which can be relevant for arid systems. People in Australia, the Great Basin, and the Middle East have been working on ways to help seedlings get through that really vulnerable stage between a seed and a plant with a developed root system. And enhancement or coating is one of the technologies that's used for that. And then the final article is actually getting to plant and use seeds in the field, and that talks more about site prep and equipment for planting. Some Xerces resources that we have, and I want to talk about is our work in milkweeds and plant materials development. So about 5 or 6 years ago, Xerces was involved in Project Milkweed, and one of the great products that came out of this is this publication, Milkweeds, A Conservation Practitioner's Guide. We have hard copies available of this if you want to reach out to us. It's also available for free as a PDF download from our website, and it has 105 pages, so it's very thorough. It talks again about milkweed species, how to do collection or harvest of them, how to cultivate them, what are some of the disease or pest pressures that might be of concern, and then also examples of how they've been used in habitat restoration. A current project that we are working on is plant materials for monarchs in the San Joaquin Valley. And this is a partnership with California BLM, Xerces, and Great Valley Seed, which is in Los Banos. And as has been mentioned, currently these early emerging milkweeds are considered really critical and a priority for monarchs in the West. So this project is looking at getting more of those available commercially for conservation projects and individual private landowners to be able to purchase and use in habitat restoration. And one of those species is pictured here, the California milkweed. And then our website, xerces.org/milkweed. We have a whole bunch of links that are more focused on milkweed. If you can't tell by now, Stephanie McKnight is more focused on the monarch side, but also milkweeds in the West. And I'm a bit more focused on milkweeds and plant materials and native plants in general, the habitat side of things. So we've got a monarch page as well as a milkweed page on the Xerces website. This is a really concise 3-page document that's available. It's called Native Milkweed in California, Planting and Establishment. And it's it's just that. I know the text on here is really small, but it's really talks about where should milkweed be planted, which kinds of milkweed or which species, how to establish them. There's a bit about site prep, how to establish milkweed from seed, how to do it from transplants, also how to establish milkweed from rhizomes, and then another section with additional resources and links there. So that's kind of a good go-to reference. We also have a pollinator conservation resource center on our website, and that covers North America, but then California has its own section. And here you can see, this is a website, and I've just taken a screenshot here. But each of those sort of turquoise colored bands, if you click on them, they expand. So habitat assessment, you can expand that and find more information and resources. Installation, plant lists, habitat management, pesticide protection, identification and monitoring resources, native seed lists, native seed mix lists, and also native seed and plant vendors are listed there, and then also more information for further reading. If you choose one of those and you look at our plant lists, one that we have, for example, is monarch nectar plants for California. So that is really organized by flowering season, starting in the spring through summer to fall. And it lists, they're fairly manageable, I think, of about 20 species that will be widely available commercially. So these are really good workhorse species if you have limited resources or are just getting started. We also have a series of roadside milkweed guides. Again, these are milkweed that you would most likely find or that grow well in roadside habitats. So if those are the types of spaces you're working in, this is a real nice, it's just a front side and a back side, which highlights which those species are, where in California they grow. It talks about what soil type they grow on and how to identify them. We have a new book coming out in just a few weeks. It'll be shipping and in stores on April 13th. And this is 100 Plants to Feed the Monarch. Myself and Stephanie, along with some other Xerces colleagues, are among the co-authors to this. And it has a few chapters that really talk about monarchs and creating and protecting habitat for them. And then the bulk of the book are plant profiles for both milkweeds. There are some plant genera that are not in Asclepias, but which are also host plants, and those are covered in here as well. And then a long list of nectar plants, including trees, shrubs, and vines. And here's an example of what the profile for California milkweed looks like. So there's a few photos, a map of where the plant's native range is, places like uses that fit that plant well, and also other information about how tall it grows and what type of soil moisture it requires. So that was a book. Back to things you can find and download on the Xerces website are regional California plant lists. So these are more for pollinators and beneficial insects, but they each include milkweed species on there. So these are a bit more specific to these subregions that are listed here within California. And again, just to zoom in here and show you, there's also a nice series of icons. So if there's a butterfly, that's telling you it's a monarch nectar plant. The little caterpillar is telling you it's a host plant for some type of butterfly or moth, or even a specialist bee. Some of those are shown that they their stems are good for nesting sites for the bees that we learned about earlier that nest in stems. There's a lot of great detail included in these lists. And then we have a tool on our website, which is called Milkweed Seed Finder. And this allows you to go in, and then the center of the slide, you can choose the state of interest, which milkweed species you want to focus on. and if you're looking for live plants or seeds. So here, just for example, I chose California. I chose Asclepias cordifolia, heartleaf milkweed, and I was open to either getting plants or seed. And this brought up 3 different commercial sources for that species. And it also shows you what other species that same supplier carries. So that's a good place where you can go to try to find sources for milkweed species. I've seen many people mention California Native Plant Society and CalScape in the chat, and that is another excellent, phenomenal resource. California Native Plant Society has so much information online. They also have a lot of great webinar and virtual presentations, which you can watch live or view recorded. You can learn so much by watching those. And hopefully as the pandemic wanes, they'll go back to a lot of the great in-person programming that they have as well. And then CalScape is another online tool that, like this one, I searched for coyote bush, and then you get a lot of information about the plant as well as maps about where it grows. And then you can see there's another link. It says 53 nurseries carry this plant. And if you click on that, then it will take you to another page which lists those nurseries and the contact information. So it's another great resource. There were some questions and comments about managing rangelands for pollinators. And Xerces has a publication for that, Best Management Practices for Pollinators on Western Rangelands. We also have a staff person with the pollinator program who's based in California and focused on rangelands. So look for that publication on our website. And then we have some new fact sheets about buying bee-safe plants. You're the consumer going to your nursery. And then on the flip side, for nurseries, whether you're the grower or the retailer, we have information on offering bee-safe plants. So those are available at the first link I've listed here. There's also currently a call to action. If you go to that page, you can click on a link which will allow you to sign up and show you ways that you can talk to your nursery or your native plant supplier and learn about the pesticide practices that they are or aren't using, and have a constructive conversation with them about how to minimize the effect of those pesticides. It can really be consumer driven. People want, on the one hand, what they consider a perfect looking plant, but a perfect plant is one that's also being eaten by insects, whether they're feeding on the nectar and pollen or chewing the leaves. And so certainly for people who are looking for plants for pollinator or monarch habitat, minimizing how much pesticide is used on them, especially for aesthetic reasons, is important. And these resources are intended to help move that needle in the right direction. I also already mentioned the Pollinator Resource Center. Within that, we also have a site prep section with information and more details and information. And if you're not from California, I mentioned California Native Plant Society, but a good place to start to find your own local Native Plant Society, if you're not in California, is at the North American Native Plant Society website. They have a link which shows Native Plant Societies throughout California and the US and a few in Mexico. So those are great places locally to connect with the people and the information in those organizations. And just in general, to recap, the best pollinator-friendly and monarch-friendly plants are those that are native to your particular area. They're what are called straight species. So they're most similar to the wild type. They haven't been bred to have a different flower color than they do in the wild. They haven't been bred to have double petals, or they haven't been bred to not have pollen. So for that reason, we recommend avoiding cultivars or nativars. And then again, try to source plants that are not carrying any pesticide residue. If you're working in a smaller habitat like a yard or garden or park, we have a great document that helps guide you through all the different components of both the plants that you can offer there for pollinators, as well as nesting sites, whether that be standing stems or bare soil or rock piles and things. So this is a really handy tool that I find it helps teach me. It's a good teaching tool to learn about what is good habitat, just by going through and walking around your own yard and following the different sections here and scoring yourself in them. And then it gives you suggestions on how you can improve the quality or value for pollinators and monarchs. We have a few other books that are The 100 Plants to Feed the Monarch is our newest book, but again, we have Attracting Native Pollinators, 100 Plants to Feed the Bees, Gardening for Butterflies, and then Farming with Native Beneficial Insects. These are our books. We don't sell the books, we're a nonprofit, but you can search for these online or find them at your local bookseller. Some other great resources that are not quite available out in the world, but they'll be coming, is that at Xerces, we are hosting and launching a native plant nursery seed directory. This will also be for all of North America, and expands a bit on what I showed you with Milkweed Seed Finder or Calscape. So this will show all the native plant nurseries or native seed suppliers, and then you can filter them for different characteristics and location. And that will be launching next month. And then for restoration, the Society for Ecological Restoration and the Bureau of Land Management are developing training modules focused on arid and semi-arid lands with information on seed technology and restoration, and that will be available or presented this summer. Currently, there's plant materials for Western monarchs in California, a working group focused on that topic, and especially the early emerging milkweed species that we've heard are very important, and as well as nectar plants for early and late season. If you're interested in joining that group, we've only had one meeting so far. We're all gearing up to do a lot of monarch habitat restoration, and the point of this group is to coordinate. So we're not overlapping or duplicating efforts, and we're not competing or impacting wild populations negatively, but so that we can coordinate. So please reach out to us at our milkweed@xerces.org email if you'd like to learn more. And another really exciting project is the California Bumblebee Atlas. This will be launching in April. You can visit this website and sign up to be on the list to receive more information. But this is also a community science effort to map and observe which bumblebees are where in which parts of California, and what types of habitat they're in, and what plant species they're using as food resources. And with that, I just want to thank all of our Xerces partners, from our members to all of the other organizations and agencies and scientists that we work with. And thank Susan for organizing us today, and just ask everyone, let everyone know that Xerces is a donor-supported membership organization. We'd love to have you join us. And with that, I will end my presentation and hand it back over to you, Susan.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. That was perfect. We sure appreciate your participation. So I think what I'll do is, while you're taking down your slides, I will go to our third poll, if you could answer that, and at the same time send you a few questions that have been coming through, you and Stephanie McKnight. One of the questions was about tags for monarchs, asking about their availability. Apparently they come through Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. And is there any other place to get those?
I'm familiar with getting them through Monarch Watch. Stephanie McKnight, do you know otherwise?
Yeah, so in California, the situation's a little trickier, because to handle adult monarchs in California, you actually have to have a permit from CDFW. And so all tags have to go through Cal Poly, which is the main source of tags in California. If you live outside of California, there are other tagging programs such as the Southwest Monarch Study. So if you're in Arizona or Utah or New Mexico, you can go through Southwest Monarch Study. And then in other states in Pacific Northwest, you can go through Pacific Northwest Monarchs. But for California, it's limited because handling adult monarchs is illegal.
All right, thank you so much. And the next question is from Daryl Schramm, who asks, why should you avoid planting milkweed within 5 miles of the coast? Did you hear that?
Yeah.
Okay.
I can take this, and Steph, if I say something that doesn't sound right, you can jump in and correct me.
No, that's good.
So in general, historically, milkweed was pretty rare along the California coast. Not that it didn't occur or doesn't currently occur, but for the most part, north of Santa Barbara, milkweed was pretty rare along the California coast, and planting milkweed near overwintering sites, which is coastal California, so within that 5-mile buffer, planting milkweed near those overwintering sites can disrupt their natural inclination to remain in diapause and not breed during the winter months. So it's really important to not plant milkweed near their overwintering sites. Now, south of Santa Barbara, milkweed is more common and currently does grow. Native milkweeds do currently grow within the coast. And so Xerces, our policy is that north of Santa Barbara, to avoid planting milkweed within 5 miles of the coast. South of Santa Barbara, it's to avoid planting milkweed within a mile of overwintering sites. So, and the justification for that is we just don't want to disrupt monarchs' natural life cycle, and we want to restore habitat where it historically occurred on the landscape.
Thank you. And I'll do a last one, and then I'll open it up to questions for the entire group of presenters. Should we be trying to create roadside habitats? Is there an impact to butterflies from cars? That's from Marty Rutherford and some others.
I'll start this one, Stephanie McKnight, and then you can add anything if you would like to. Another hazard or reason for monarch decline are traffic collisions. If you think of, especially again, the distances that the eastern population are traveling, thousands of miles, they are crossing roads with a lot of vehicles, and also in California, there's a lot of development in highways and roads. But I'm not familiar with a specific study that has just looked at monarchs in roadsides and whether roadsides are a sink or a source. But certainly for pollinators, it's been where it has been studied, a roadside habitat is actually more beneficial than detrimental, even accounting for what some of those losses to collision are.
All right, thank you. I'm going to give you one more just because it's important. Are there any population models predicting the Western monarch future population levels? And that's from Tiffany Russell. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think Kat Darst touched on the population viability analyses that they did for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service listing decision. There's also a population viability analysis conducted by Cheryl Schultz at Washington State University. So Kat, go ahead and jump in because I feel like you're probably the better person to answer this question.
Yeah, for sure. So we used Cheryl's model and just added additional years of data and added some perturbations to account for climate change and changes in rate of habitat loss. So it's essentially the same thing. And so, yeah, I presented on those probabilities of persistence for Western monarchs. And, unless something really changes, the probability of persistence is very, very low. For sort of PVA nerds, the quasi-extinction threshold is around 30,000 monarchs. And we had those 2 years of 2018 and 2019 where it dipped below that threshold. And this last year of 2,000 monarchs, if you use that as your starting population size and project out, we're going to really have to up the habitat quality and quantity for that first stopover zone to bring them back from those numbers. So I hope that answers your question.
I think that does. Thank you. I'm going to put everybody up. So I don't know, Scott and Stephanie McKnight, Greg, if you want to put your cameras on, I'll try to spotlight everybody. I think I can only spotlight you if you have your camera on. So Scott Logan, I don't know if you're still there. Greg, is your camera on? I'll add you here.
I'm here.
Okay, great. Let's see. Let me go back through. There were so many good questions and that I know we didn't get to all of them. One question about milkweeds was from Fred Edwards. Are you using seed transfer guidance for milkweeds to improve the survival and the effectiveness of milkweed seedings and plantings?
I can start to reply to that one. First of all, for those who may not be familiar with seed transfer guidelines, those are boundaries that are drawn that attempt to provide recommendations about where the provenance, which is the original wild source of genetics of a certain seed lot or plant, how far that can be moved before you have any real downsides in its fitness or success out in the wild. And a lot of those zones are based on different climate and precipitation models. And certainly when you look at all of the microhabitats in California, when you layer on soil and topography for that, it can get very complicated. There are provisional seed zones, which are that they're more hypothetical. They try to match what I've just talked about, climate, precipitation, soil type aspect. And then there are empirical seed transfer zones, which are actually based on experiments and on particular species. So as much as we're able, we would use the the provisional seed transfer zones, try to match where milkweeds are planted in terms of soil, climate, and precipitation to the source that the wild population originated. That's something else, though, that this working group is trying to coordinate and look at, because in some cases, a lot of the seeds that are available commercially may have originated from a California population. So we want to expand the availability of these different ecotypes within California so that seeds can be matched more appropriately from where they originated to where they're used.
Great, thank you. And I know people are having to drop off now, and we've been on for quite a while, so I appreciate everybody being so on target and attentive to all of the presenters. I want to mention again the opportunity to apply for funding from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation for habitat restoration projects, specifically for pollinators. Invite you to go to the National Fish and Wildlife webpage and check out that program. Also, we'll be definitely, this is being recorded, so we'll be making the recording available, and we'll also make the chat box available as well. We'll probably try to organize it a little bit so you don't have to scroll through quite so much. And I put up the last poll, if you could take that. We'll take some final questions if anybody wants to put anything back down in the chat box that you didn't get answered. So I see one, which is what actions could take place to save monarchs if listing occurred? Could listing by the Fish and Wildlife Service lead to the creation of Fish and Wildlife Service preserves, specifically for monarchs in their most critical habitat areas? And that comes from David Campbell. Thanks, David. Kat, are you still on?
No, she had to leave us.
Ah, okay. So
I
can
asked one of the
anybody else
Stephanies if
answer
they can
that?
help us.
Yes, Stephanie Frischi, Stephanie McKnight. Can either of you help with that?
I think Kat would have been the best person to answer this question, but I'll just say that, a listing decision or, status for this species would come with a lot of funding and resources being poured into those priority areas that I talked about earlier in my presentation. So protecting and restoring overwintering habitat and protecting and restoring breeding habitat in that first stopover zone in California, or where they go when they first leave overwintering sites. So I would say that yes, it probably could have an impact. I think from research, we know that by restoring early season milkweed in California, that's the most likely to have a positive impact on the population growth.
Good. Thank you for that answer, Stephanie. And I don't think I see anything. I'd have to go back through lots and lots of comments and questions. So since
I
we're
saw one on fire.
Oh, okay. I didn't see that one. Definitely.
Yeah, the question was just how are milkweeds impacted by prescribed fire, if I'm remembering correctly. And milkweeds are all perennials, so they have underground rhizomes or codexes. They have a way to resprout, even if they be consumed by fire during the growing season. Seeds, depending on the intensity and the duration of the fire, might be killed that are on the ground, but they also might survive that. Depends just on the type of fire. And in general, milkweeds are species that are from grasslands or open, less wooded type habitat. So because of that, they are often fire adapted.
Okay, good. I found that. And that's from Trisha Bratcher. So thanks very much for that question. All right. And I don't see any more new ones. I know there are some left up there. We will be hosting more sessions, and we will be taking into consideration your suggestions for video, as well as for running the stream of the presentation in words during the presentation. So thanks for all of that information. We appreciate it. Anything else that you would like to add, Greg, as we close?
I just want to thank everyone for participating. I thought the presenters were fantastic, and I look forward to working together with as many people as possible to create more habitat for pollinators. I think it's a wonderful team to be on, and I'm looking forward to a lot of success in the next few years.
Yep, and it looks like we've got a lot of good information from the polls about what people are looking for. So we'll definitely be responding to your comments again. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for your time and your afternoon and your interest in pollinators. And thanks to the speakers.
Thank you.